Hey there, pilots! This is Dauntless Sam, and today we'll be looking at the history of the Polikarpov I-16 and its flight characteristics in War Thunder. The Polikarpov I-16 was a Soviet fighter aircraft of a revolutionary design. It was the world's first low-wing cantilever monoplane fighter with retractable landing gear to have attained operational status, and as such introduced a new vogue in fighter design. The I-16 was introduced in the mid-1930s and formed the backbone of the Soviet Air Force at the beginning of World War II. The diminutive fighter had many nicknames. It was named the Donkey by Soviet pilots, the Rat by nationalists, the Fly by Republicans, and the Flying Squirrel by the Finnish. While working on the Polikarpov I-15 biplane, Nikolai Polikarpov began designing an advanced monoplane fighter. It featured cutting-edge innovations such as retractable landing gear and a fully enclosed cockpit, and it was optimized for speed with a short, stubby fuselage, and a Wright Cyclone radial engine in an NACA cowling. The aircraft was small, light, and simple to build. Full-scale work on the TSKB-12 prototype began in June 1933, and the aircraft was accepted into production on the 22nd of November 1933, a month before it took to the air. The TSKB-12 was of mixed construction, which used wood, steel, aluminum, and fabric. Another modern feature were the ailerons, which ran almost the entire trailing edge of the wing and also operated as flaps by drooping 15 degrees. The cockpit was covered by a 40-centimeter wide canopy which featured Aldous tubular gun sights which could slide back and forth on the runners fitted with rubber bungee cords. The 225-liter fuel tank was fitted directly in front of the cockpit. The main landing gear was fully retractable by hand crank. The armament consisted of a pair of 7.62mm machine guns in the wings, mounted on the outboard side of the main gear, and 900 rounds of ammunition. These features were proposed at first by Andrei Tupolev. The TSKB-12 was designed around the Wright Cyclone SR-1820F3 9-cylinder radial engine, rated at 710 horsepower. The TSKB-12 first took to the air on December 30th, 1933. Initial government trials in February of 1934 revealed very good maneuverability, but the aircraft did not tolerate abrupt control inputs. Thus, the TSKB-12 was deemed dangerous to fly, and all aerobatics were forbidden. The M22 version was preferred due to the vibration of the Cyclone-powered aircraft. Pilots commented early on about the difficulty of climbing into the cockpit, a trait that persisted with the I-16's service life. Before continuing test flights, the designers had to answer the question of spin behavior. Wind tunnel testing suggested that the TSKB-12, with its short tail, would enter an unrecoverable flat spin, but real-life trials were necessary to confirm this. Since Cyclone engines were rare, it was decided to risk the M22 prototype for this purpose. On March 1st and 2nd, 1934, 75 spins were performed, and it was discovered that the aircraft had very benign stall behavior, and intentional spins could easily be terminated by placing the controls in a neutral position. Service trials of the new fighter, designated I-16, began on March 22, 1934. The M22 prototype reached 359 kilometers an hour. The manually retracted landing gear was prone to jamming and required considerable strength from the pilot. Most of the test flights were performed with the gear extended. On May 1, 1934, the M22 prototype participated in the flyover of Red Square. Approximately 30 I-16 Type 1 aircraft were delivered. Most pilots who flew the I-16 Type 1 for evaluation purposes did not find the aircraft to have many redeeming characteristics. Regardless of pilot opinion, much attention was focused on the Cyclone-powered aircraft and the M25. On April 14, 1934, the Cyclone prototype was damaged when one of the landing gear legs collapsed while it was taxiing. The third prototype with a Cyclone engine incorporated a series of aerodynamic improvements and was delivered for government trials on September 7, 1934. The top speed of 437 kilometers an hour no longer satisfied the Air Force, who now wanted the experimental Nazarov M58 engine and 470 kilometers an hour. Subsequently, the M22-powered version entered production at Factory 21 in Nizhny Novgorod and Factory 39 in Moscow. Because it was the fourth aircraft produced by these factories, it received the designation I-16 Type 4. Aircraft fitted with these new engines required a slightly changed airframe, including armor plating for the pilot and changes to the landing gear doors to allow for complete closure. The M25 fitted I-16, the I-16 Type 5, featured a new engine cowling which was slightly smaller in diameter, and featured 9 forward-facing shuttered openings to control cooling airflow, and a redesigned exhaust with 8 individual outlet stubs, and other changes. The M25 was rated at 635 horsepower at sea level and 700 horsepower at 2,300 meters. Due to the poor quality of the canopy glazing, the I-16 Type 5 pilots typically left the canopy open or removed the rear portion completely. By the time the Type 5 arrived, it was the world's lightest production fighter, as well as the world's fastest, able to reach speeds of 454 kilometers an hour at altitude and 395 kilometers an hour at sea level. While the Type 5 could not perform the high G maneuvers of other fighters, it possessed superior speed and climb rates, and had extremely responsive aileron controls which gave it a very good roll rate, which led to precision maneuvers in loops and split S's. A total of 7,005 single-seat and 1,639 two-seat trainer variants were produced. Initial experience revealed that the SHKAS machine guns had a tendency to jam. This was the result of the guns being installed in the wings upside down to facilitate the fit. The problem was addressed in later modifications. Evaluations from pilots confirmed the experience with the prototypes. Controls were light and sensitive, abrupt maneuvers resulted in spins, and spin behavior was excellent. An aileron roll could be performed in under 1.5 seconds. The machine guns were fired via a cable, and the required effort, coupled with the sensitive controls, made precision aiming difficult. The rear weight bias made the I-16 easy to handle on unprepared airfields because the aircraft was rather unlikely to flip over at the nose even if the front wheels dug in. The I-16 was a difficult fighter to fly. The pilots had poor visibility, and the canopy tended to become fouled with engine oil, and the moving portion was prone to slamming shut during hard maneuvers, which caused many pilots to fix it into an open position. The front section of the fuselage, with the engine, was too close to the center of gravity, and the pilot's cockpit too far to the rear. The Polikarpov had insufficient longitudinal stability, and it was impossible to fly the aircraft hand-off. At the start of the Spanish Civil War in 1936, Republican forces pleaded for fighter aircraft. After receiving payment in gold, Joseph Stalin dispatched around 475 I-16 Type 5s and Type 6s. The first I-16s appeared in Spanish skies in November 1936. The Polikarpov monoplanes had their baptism of fire on November 13, 1936, when 12 I-16s intercepted a nationalist bombing raid on Madrid. Soviet pilots claimed 4 air victories and 2 German Heinkel HE-51 pilots were killed. But the Soviets suffered losses too. The group commander collided with an enemy aircraft, and another I-16 pilot crash-landed. The Polikarpovs immediately began dominating enemy HE-51s and Arado AR-68 biplanes, and remained unchallenged until the introduction of the Messerschmitt Bf-109. The arrival of the newest Bf-109Bs and the overwhelming numerical superiority of the nationalist fighters were the primary cause of the heavy I-15 and I-16 combat losses suffered throughout 1937. A number of aviation publications called the new Soviet fighter a Boeing due to the incorrect assumption that it was based on Boeing's P-26 design. The nationalists nicknamed the stubby fighter the Rat, while the Republicans affectionately called it the Fly. Combat experience showed that the I-16 had deficiencies. Several aircraft were lost after structural failure of the wings, which was quickly remedied by reinforced structures. Heavy machine gun bullets could sometimes penetrate the armored backrest, and fuel tanks occasionally caught fire in spite of being protected. The hot Spanish summers required the addition of oil radiators, and dust adversely affected the life of the engines. Although some aircraft accumulated up to 400 hours of flying time, the average lifespan of the I-16 was 87 days, of which 1/6 of that was spent on maintenance. The biggest complaint in service was the light armament of only two 7.62mm machine guns. This was urgently addressed with the Type 6, which added a third machine gun to the bottom of the fuselage. The 4-gun Type 10 was nicknamed the Superfly, or simply Super. The total number of I-16s delivered to Spain from 1936 to 1938 amounted to 276. When the war ended on April 1, 1939, 187 rats had been lost in Spain, 112 lost in combat, 1 shot down by anti-aircraft fire, 11 destroyed on the ground, 1 force landed, and 62 lost in accidents. Another 250 I-16 Type 10s were supplied to China. This model added a second set of 7.62mm machine guns, armor behind the pilot, and had a slightly upgraded 750 horsepower M25 engine. In 1939, of the 500 I-16s deployed to the fighting of Nomonhan, approximately 112 were lost during the battles of Kok Gol, of which 88 were destroyed in aerial combat, primarily against the all-metal Ki-27 IJA fighters. During test trials in Russia of the captured Ki-27, the aircraft proved superior to the Soviet I-15 BIS, I-15 153, and the I-16 in aerial combat, as well as having a faster takeoff and lower landing speed requiring shorter airstrips than the I-16, which needed 270 meters to stop and 380 meters for a takeoff. Further attempts were made to upgrade the firepower of the aircraft using 20mm cannons, making the I-16 one of the most heavily armed fighters of the period, able to fire 28 pounds of ammunition every 3 seconds. Pilots loved the results, but the cannons were in short supply and only a small number of the I-16 Type 12, 17, 27, and 28 were built. The cannons adversely affected performance, with 360-degree turn time increasing from 15 seconds in the Type 5 to 18 seconds. The Type 24 replaced the skid with a tail wheel and featured the much more powerful 900 horsepower M63 engine. The Type 29 replaced 2 of the machine guns with a single 12.7mm UBS machine gun. Types 18, 24, 27, 28, and 29 could be fitted to carry RS-82 unguided rockets. A 1939 government study found that the I-16 had exhausted its performance potential. The addition of armor, radio, battery, and flaps during the aircraft's evolution exacerbated the rear weight distribution problems to the point where the aircraft required considerable forward pressure on the stick to maintain level flight, and at the same time developed a tendency to enter uncontrolled dives. Extension and retraction of the landing flaps caused a dramatic change in the aircraft's altitude. Accurate gunfire was difficult. Russian pilots nicknamed the aircraft Ishak, also translated as donkey, because it was similar to the Russian pronunciation of I-16. When Operation Barbarossa erupted on June 22, 1941, 1,635 of the 4,226 Russian aircraft were I-16s of all variants, fielded by 57 fighter regiments in frontier areas. The main assault delivered by the Luftwaffe was directed against the Soviet Western Special Military District that deployed 361 I-16s. During the early phase of the campaign, the I-16 bases were the main targets for the German aircraft, and after 48 hours of combat, of the 1,635 Polikarpov monoplanes in service on June 21, 1941, only 937 were left. By June 30th, the number of I-16s in the Western Front Line units had dropped to 873, including 99 that required repairs. To stem the Luftwaffe aerial assault, several I-16 pilots adopted the Taran tactic and sacrificed their lives, ramming German aircraft. Its main opponent in the sky in 1941 was the German Messerschmitt Bf-109. The I-16 was slightly more maneuverable than the early Bf-109s and could fight the Messerschmitt Bf-109E on equal terms in turns. Skilled Soviet pilots took advantage of the Polikarpov's superior horizontal maneuverability and liked it enough to resist the switch to more modern fighters. The German aircraft, however, outclassed its Russian opponent in service ceiling, rate of climb, acceleration, and crucially, in horizontal and diving speed, due to better aerodynamics and a more powerful engine. The main versions of the I-16 had a maximum speed of 450 to 470 km an hour, while the Bf-109E had a maximum speed of 560 to 570 km an hour. The more streamlined Bf-109F could hit 615 km an hour. Superior speed was the decisive factor in a dogfight, so German pilots held the initiative and could decide if they wanted to chase their opponents, could attack them from above or behind, and then gain altitude for a new attack. Meanwhile, Polikarpovs could only defend each other by forming a defensive circle or via horizontal maneuverability. Moreover, in terms of armament, Messerschmitts had a slight edge on the I-16. The 109E carried two wing-mounted 20mm cannons and two synchronized 7.92mm machine guns, with the weight of a 1-second salvo of 2.37 kilograms, while the most common version of the I-16 could only deliver 1.43 kilograms of bullets each second. Finally, the ammunition storage on a Messerschmitt exceeded that of the I-16, carrying 1,000 bullets for each machine gun, plus 60 rounds for each cannon, while the Polikarpov just carried 450 rounds for each machine gun. The I-16 had a more durable engine than the liquid-cooled engine of the Bf-109. Around half of all produced I-16s were still in service in 1943, when they were finally replaced. Specially modified I-16s were used in the Sveno parasite aircraft experiments using the Tupolev TB-3 as a mothership. In War Thunder, there are two I-16s, the Type 18 and the Premium Type 28. The Type 18 is armed with four 7.62mm machine guns with 2,600 rounds. The Type 28 is armed with two 20mm cannons with 300 rounds and two 7.62mm machine guns. The 7.62mm machine guns have an extremely high rate of fire, so ammunition does not last as long as you would expect. Both variants are very maneuverable and can outturn many monoplane fighters. In addition to this maneuverability, the aircraft is very small and is a very hard target to hit. These advantages are negated slightly by the very light armor. When tailed by an enemy, pull out of the enemy's line of fire, never go head-on with an enemy aircraft. Even reserve aircraft can tear the I-16 apart when given such an easy target. Both I-16s have a quick rate of climb. The Type 18 climbs at 3,642 feet per minute, and the Type 28 climbs at 3,543 feet per minute. Both variants are relatively slow and do not retain speed well after a dive. Don't expect to catch anyone who tries to boom and zoom you. Try to drag enemies to lower altitudes and engage them in turn fights. The I-16 can also be loaded with either two 50-kilogram bombs, two 100-kilogram bombs, or 6 RS-82 rockets. The rockets can be useful for heavier targets that your machine guns can't take down quickly, but any of these extra loadouts will decrease your top speed and maneuverability. I hope that this information has proved helpful. If you liked the video, please do like the video. If you would like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you think anyone else would be interested in this video, don't be afraid to share it. This is Dauntless Sam. Thanks for watching.